Good morning, everyone. It's time for some more maintenance on Sunshine, specifically the raw water pump. I have replaced the impeller, and one other thing I did, as many of you know that have worked on raw water pumps, they have a cover like this. And you can see here, after 40 something years, this part broke off due to corrosion. Fortunately, when I went to the shop to get the quadrant bracket repaired and had another one made, I also got this nice piece of bronze plate. It's about twice as thick as that other one. All I have to do is drill the holes for the mounting in it. So that shouldn't be too bad. I think I paid the equivalent of about $10 US for this piece of bronze. Those covers for the pumps cost various amounts on eBay in the US, usually $30, $40, $50, some insane price like that. So fortunately I was able to get this piece of bronze. Right now I have a piece of UHDP, ultra high density polyethylene. It's about 3/8 of an inch, 10 mil thick. Did the same thing, cut out a circle, drilled the holes, made some new gaskets because I have gasket material, put that on in place of the other one because it was leaking through that broken area. Anyway, the plastic one, ultra high density polyethylene is really tough stuff, and it's very slippery. So even though the impeller rubs up against it, as long as it remains wet, that shouldn't be a problem. I do have to take it off though to get the impeller out because I need to remove the raw water pump to replace the seals. The bearings are fine. The shaft's not wiggling. It's a bit of a chore, and I've done it a couple times already over the years. So actually replacing the seals is not hard. It's getting the pump off. It's a gear-driven pump. It drives off of a shaft that runs the fuel injection pump system. Anyway, where I've got to go, of course, first thing is I have to take the hose clamps off, take the hoses off. This hose clamp is the one that broke, and the pressure of the water from the pump just popped that hose off. That was back on our trip from Pangkor to Thailand when the second time the engine overheated. I put one of those new style clamps on, which are much better because the engagement for the screw doesn't cut all the way through the stainless on these new style clamps, so they don't break across the clamp so easily. In fact, I don't think I've ever had one of these fail. Much better design. And here it is just a few short minutes later, and the pump is removed from that housing. And this is, like I said, the first time I did this is the one that drove me crazy, because the bolt is installed from the back instead of going in this way. It goes in the other way, and the reason for that is because the motor mount bracket here blocks the removal of that bolt. So it would be very difficult because I have to reach up underneath here to get at the head of that bolt. And trying to get the nut on there, because the head of the bolt is only about 2 millimeters away from the edge of the motor mount, because it goes over to the motor and down that way. It blocks the head of that bolt. Yeah, that caused me quite a bit of consternation the first time I took this apart. But now I know it, so it's pretty quick and easy. I mean, the whole thing only took me maybe 15 minutes to get off of there. There's the pump. This is the gear drive. There's a seal in here and a seal in here. And the bearings. I'm not sure if there's 2 bearings in here, or 1 bearing in here, or 1 bearing in here. Hopefully I got the spares. If you get the old ones out, you can go to any bearing and seal place and they can cross-reference those parts, and you'll pay about 1/10 you would pay. Like if I went to Perkins to try to buy those seals and bearings, they would charge me 10 times the actual cost of the parts, which fortunately can usually be readily found almost anywhere in the world that has a place that sells bearings and seals. This is a tool that some of you may or may not be familiar with. Made by Vice Grips. And it clamps with a chain, which is great for odd shapes, round things that don't have any other way to grip, like pulleys, or in this case, this gear that drives the water pump. I got to take that off because it is attached to the shaft that turns the impeller. And this tool works very well for that, although it's a bit clumsy to use in this type of application. I used it quite a bit back in my construction days of it as an electrician, because it's a great size for turning big conduit. And bingo bango, the nut is off. Now I got to do is get that gear off the shaft. And one thing, of course, it should be in every boat owner's toolbox. It's a handy dandy gear puller. Just had to put that on, snug it up a little bit. One little tap with the hammer, popped right off. And now the fun part. Since I don't have circlip pliers, got to get down here, squeeze those ends together, and pop this circlip out, because that retains the bearing right there. I usually can make do with some needle nose pliers and a little bitty screwdriver or something to get that out of there. Always a good idea when you take your water pump apart to get a picture of the impeller so you can see which direction it turns. So when you put it back together, you can see these veins here you have to compress, because that's where the pumping action is. The water comes in here, it goes out there. Want to make sure that you bend these veins over in the right direction so they don't have to try and flip around the other way. So if I put it into the vein going that way, the thing is turning this way, and it would have to try to catch to flip over this way. So better to have a picture of it so you know which way when you put it back together. Sometimes these can be a little tough to get out depending on how they're attached. This one's pretty simple. It's got a little bronze shim in there and a stainless steel piece of all thread, and it fits in a groove in the end of the shaft, and that's how the shaft turns this. So sometimes you can just grab a hold of it and pull them out, or sometimes it's stuck here and you might have to use a couple of screwdrivers like this, one on each side, and kind of wedge it out of there a little bit at a time. Generally, impellers are not too bad unless this part of it is heavily corroded. It's been sitting and hasn't been removed for a long time. Then it can be a real bitch to get out. They actually make little pullers, like the gear puller there, that can be used to pull impellers out. I never bothered with one because I've never had real bad trouble getting the impeller out. Anyway, on the other side, the snap ring that holds the bearing in place, I've removed that. So now I got to pull this out because this shaft has to go out in this direction, and it takes that bearing with it as it goes out that way. Also, you can see here, that's part of the seal in the bearing. This is a ball bearing. It has grease in there and it's all factory sealed. And this seal is deteriorating slowly. So a good time, because the shaft is, the bearing's quite good. The shaft has got no wiggle in it. So better to replace it now than after, if all the grease gets flushed out of there, which accelerates the wear on the bearing tremendously, and then the shaft starts to wobble, and then it deteriorates the seals much faster. Anyway, down inside there is the seal. And the water seal usually is the first one to go. There's another seal in here. That's to keep the oil from this side, the motor side, from leaking out of the shaft. This seal keeps the water from the pump from going out. It won't really accumulate in the pump. Different pumps vary slightly, but it just comes out and drips out here. And this one was starting to drip, which is a sure sign that this seal is starting to wear excessively. Not too bad yet, but it's getting worse. And the thing is, if it gets really bad, that high pressure water, because there's a bearing in here, will start to work on the seal on the bearing, and if it blows the seal out, then it blows all the grease out of the bearing, and you're lubricating your bearing with salt water. Guaranteed not to last very long. So after a few gentle taps on the end of the shaft here with a block of wood and a mallet, it drives the shaft out of the housing. Now, of course, all these water pumps maybe vary a little bit. This is an O-ring that goes on here to seal so the engine oil doesn't leak out. I always find it handy to have a bunch of little scrap blocks of wood for doing various things of this nature that I can drill into, saw into, pound against, use to pound against things. So you can see there's the bearings. And they look like they're in pretty good shape, but I can feel a little drag on them when I turn that shaft by hand. That's a seal and an O-ring. That's the water. Yeah, it's got two seals on it. There's one there. And it's a little hard to see, but there's another seal down inside the housing there. Okay, there we go. There's the new bearings. There's another little circlip there that holds them in the right place so they don't put them too far in the shaft. There's the new seals. Surprising thing is, these seals are actually for a 115cc Suzuki. On the left side of the motor is the shift lever, and this shift lever turns a shaft, and that shaft has a seal to the engine case, and that's what this seal is. It's a Suzuki 115cc motorbike shift lever shaft seal. And needless to say, you can bet that that's a whole lot cheaper than buying it from Perkins. Probably the price of one of these seals would pay for both of the seals and both of the bearings at a bearing shop, and also leave you some money left over. So all things considered, I'm only into this project a couple hours now, and it's not like I've been working hard or steady. That's pretty much it. All I got to do is put everything back together now. And there we go, folks. All back together again. I decided to leave this on and see how it performs. I'd check it again after run the engine for a while. It's pretty easy, just take the screws off. Take they're little machine screws, unscrew them, that pops right off, and I can check it for wear. This O-ring, of course, goes on here to seal this housing, the water pump against the housing on the motor. I'll replace this circlip, this little O-ring that go on the shaft in there, hold things in place. Now all I gotta do is reinstall it on the engine and give it the smoke test, or in this case the leak test. And there it is. Pump is reinstalled. Left the hose off the top because I got to bleed the system of air. These impeller pumps are not real good at creating enough suction to suck up the water. So we really need to bleed the air out of the system so it's a solid column of water from the through hull up through the strainer, which I have the top of slightly above the water line. So I take the cap off to break the siphon so the water doesn't keep flowing in the hose that goes into the bottom of the pump there. So